It's Matt here with 911R, and we're doing something special here today. I got Paul Kane on this on the Zoom call that we're recording to put up to talk about this 73 and a half 911 Targa that's in the rare signal yellow color. Paul is the gentleman that found the car and recommissioned it and got it going and sold it a couple of years ago to our client. And I thought it'd just be so interesting to talk to him because the story and the history and honestly the research and the attention to detail in doing a sympathetic preservation restoration on this car is so great. So welcome, Paul.
All right, hey Matt, thanks for the time and kicking up the dust on this story. I just went through my notes again. It was 2021 when the car sold, and
right.
Let me just start with a positive BAT story. Your client, the guy that I sold it to, what a pleasure, and what
Absolutely.
a gentleman and a serious Porsche enthusiast. I felt so good about turning the car over to him as a caretaker, and what a gentleman to do business with. And it's good to see that it's in your hands, and hopefully we find another
new steward.
Another steward, exactly.
Yes. So, tell me a little bit about your background as a classic car person.
Well, I've been a hobbyist car, through school, tinkerer, and it got a little bit more serious after college. I had a career in TRW and automotive, in airbag crash sensing, and was director of TRW steering. And so I have a very, I would say, harsh OEM bent. I have very high regard for OEM components and OEM engineering, and with the development and testing that goes into OEM vehicles. So that's my orientation when doing car restoration work. And as I've gotten older, it's much more about the kind of wounded bird, finding a car that has really good bones, either in decay or a stalled project. And that's kind of usually when I lose self-control in terms of purchasing another project I don't need, but ones that have a really good story, but good bones, and just need to be brought back to an OEM stand, brought to the kind of what I call the new car delivery experience. What was this car like in the showroom?
Yeah, I think you've done a really great job in just really making the car what it was when it was in 1973, and not anything more, not anything less. So if let's give us the story. This is what I love, and we were just talking about how the hunt and the find and getting the background information on this car. So you found this car. It sounds like it was up in Sun Valley, originally owned by a doctor.
Well, it was owned by, I call the story the 3 R's. It was owned by Robert, and Robert was the first owner and purchased it new. And I got a cool story there I'll share. My friend is Roger, and he is always kind of on the lookout on my behalf, looking in backyards and chatting with friends about projects. And he's turned me on. He likes watching me get it done, and from a distance. So he's always got his radar on, and he's an avid fly fisherman. And there's a very exclusive fly fishing club up in Idaho he's a member of. That's the 3rd R, Randy. And so Roger, and you can edit it out, but Roger Gardner was the first owner, and he purchased the car new at Dave Strong Porsche in Salt Lake City. And he was the first owner, and he had the car through 1994. He sold it to our number 2, Randy, and Randy was second owner. And I bought it from Randy. And Randy drove the car for a number of years and then commissioned an engine rebuild. But when Roger, my buddy, contacted me, this was kind of a cool story. He was up fly fishing, and it was at the Purdy's, that's the family name. And Roger is close friends with Randy's parents, and it's a tight fly fishing community. He's up there fly fishing, looking in back corners, and he finds this Targa at the fly fishing club and goes around, looks at the car, ends up talking to Randy's mom, finds out that the original owner was Robert, who's also a friend of my friend Roger. This is again. And he said, I don't remember anything else about the weekend, but it was epic fly fishing. So he kind of left it at that. And then months later, we were at Car Week and Roger asked me what I was working on, nothing on the list. And he said, well, I know of a two-owner Targa that's up in Idaho, and it's got the original paint. Are you interested? Yeah. Yeah, I'm keenly interested. So Roger, on his next trip up there, was in a sea container. The car had been stored in a sea container for a number of years. And Roger's got his bouncy Apple phone and he's slithering along the side of the sea container on the inside, zooming in on lots of key spots and quick evidence. This is an original paint, 73 Targa. And then he introduced me to Randy, and then we started a conversation about buying the car.
Yeah, I mean, just to find an original paint car like this that's rust-free, I mean, that's a needle in a haystack alone. Then make it signal yellow is just, you know, that's the kind of the holy grail in some ways in our Porsche collecting, hunting, scavenging world.
Good point.
Quite the Easter egg.
It was quite the Easter egg, and I'm not. I have high regard for early 911s, long nose 911s, but I am not as deep into it as some of my friends. And it was through the car community in Orange County and folks like Paul Kramer who really appreciated the car. And my immediate comment to folks like that were, this is going to be a preservation effort. And it was through their enthusiasm that I got directed to the right guys to stay on course.
Yeah, no, I think you've done a great job of that. So, I always like this part. So I assume the car got shipped down to you, and yep. Tell me about it. I always like, you know, the first impression when you saw it.
It met expectations. So Randy had sent me a number of photos. I negotiated it. Randy had an employee that was driving down. He delivered the car, which was unbelievable.
Very cool.
And it showed up in front of the house, wrapped in about 3 car covers and about 800 feet of rope.
That's a good one.
We peeled the cover back, and they had gently put the deck lid back on the car, and the motor and trans were still out. But I would say met expectations. Super honest. Original paint, and the interior was not just in excellent condition. No cracks in the dash. Vinyl was good. So I would say even more excited to get started.
Yeah, you know, to find the interior in that nice of shape, really, it was just a, you know, super detail to clean to what people see today. You know, that's extremely rare.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the engine and transmission was taken out by Randy, right?
Correct.
And what had been rebuilt, but it was kind of an unknown. So you employed who to help you with that part of the project?
Well, let me just back up. I toyed with the idea of putting the motor in the car and firing it up and seeing what flavor of rebuild do you get in Idaho. And I'm sure there's great guys up there, but Randy didn't have a receipt for the details of the rebuild. And one man's rebuild in a Porsche world is wildly different than another's OEM standard of doing everything correctly.
100%, especially with a car of this caliber, you want to make sure it's right.
Yeah.
You know, because it needs to stand on its own when it's done.
And it's got, and as a preservation, it's got to be, as you say, it's got to be done right. And I have a severe fear of going back in. I really loathe rebuilding something and having to go back in and fix it. So right. I'd rather pay twice
yeah,
the rebuild and have confidence it's done right. So
yeah.
The motor and trans were joined together, but it was done. They had forced the input shaft of the transmission into the pilot bearing. The pilot bearing was installed correctly, and they had basically extruded the pilot bearing. And
Right.
that extraction, separating the trans, that was my first clue that I have to go backwards, and I'm not about to start this thing up. So
Yeah. No, you did the right choice to tear it all back down and start at ground zero.
yeah.
Everybody thinks these air-cooled motors and stuff are simple, but there's a lot of intricacies, there's a lot of tolerances, and a lot of correct parts that we use. And from my looking at it, and in the hundreds of these cars I looked at, you use the right parts, the right hardware, the right everything. So that was a big plus.
I take no credit I picked the right guy. So Fabian Prado rebuilt the motor, and my first conversation with him was, I don't compromise. I only use factory parts, and we're only going to put the best stuff in it. And with that, I knew I had the right guy. Right. And then there was other Porsche experts that were helping with all the, I would call the cosmetics, keeping me, is it yellow zinc or is it clear zinc on the hardware that holds the grill on the back of the deck lid? Right. Those kind of guys.
All those details. Who did the gearbox?
Fabian.
Fabian did that as well.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And a note that potential buyers would be interested. Fabian builds a lot of motorsport gearboxes, and he was extremely impressed that this car had been driven, his words, by an adult, and really had been driven very gingerly, and the transmission was in excellent shape.
Yeah, these early 915 mag case gearboxes are extremely fragile, and you can always tell if somebody's a meat fister shifter by when you look at the shift forks, you look at the load spots on the synchros and stuff. We see them a lot. They're much different than the alloy case gearboxes. And there's lots of little things you have to do different when assembling them, otherwise they leak. Tell me, I can tell you that lots.
No, and Fabian talked specifically. I think when we cracked the gearbox open, he went straight for the shift works. And, and his facial reaction was, wow, this thing has not been used. Yeah, they weren't bent. And,
So, you get the engine transmission back together, you get the car back together, you did a massive, detail, color sanding, polishing, getting the paint. And, let's talk about the paint and, that process.
This was a preservation effort. So the idea was just to preserve the paper thin, the OEM paint on 73 911 is really thin. And when you get down at ankle level and knee level, it gets thinner, and it is not uniform. And so it was with tremendous caution that I went panel to panel, and I'd pick a number, probably 40 or 50 hours of paint correction, one panel at a time. I was using a very aggressive 3000 grit as the most invasive, there was a lot of surface scratches. I would call it kind of garage rash, where people were putting boxes on the car when it was in storage and all that.
Yeah.
The disrespectful period.
Yeah.
And just trying to get those scratch marks out and trying to get it shiny and then stop.
Yeah. To save paint that's 50 years old is an art in itself. I'll say the paint looks wonderful in the car. It's been touched up where there was some road rash, but I think it all looks really nice. And, just to say I have a 50-year-old original paint signal yellow car is, again, something very special to having a garage.
It's a differentiator.
Yeah. What are the best things you would say about this car, or the biggest cool surprises or anything in the experience?
I would say the driving experience. It's not as throaty as a carbureted or a mechanically injected 2.4, but I might be the only guy in the car community. I like CIS.
I have to say the same thing. CIS is totally underrated. People, a lot of people just didn't know how to work on it. So you had a lot of bad CSI cars, but the CIS cars, they get great gas mileage. Yeah, they always run, and they really are hard to screw up unless you have the wrong mechanic. I've always been a fan of CIS. MFI is, everybody loves MFI because it's cool and everything, but rarely do those run right, and they're very expensive to work on. CIS, you can get to work right and, have a very reliable car.
I ended up being more of a CIS expert on some of the cars I've sold on VAT. I fully restored a Porsche 928 CIS.
Yep.
And most recently a Ford 400i, I would call double CIS.
Yeah, that's basically two cars.
Yes, it is. Two of everything.
Yeah.
But CIS, it ultra smooth power delivery, no lean spots, starts on a dime.
Yeah.
And to your point, it went through a period where guys didn't know how to work on it, so they rip it off and put carburetors on it and create a new set of issues.
Yeah, terrible.
Yeah, and so anyway, all the CIS, when the motor was out being rebuilt, I sent all the fuel distributor out and bought a new accumulator, and I think it already had new injectors in it.
Yeah. Looks like you use Parts Classic, I think, for all that.
I was a heavy user at Par. I was paying their boat payments for about 4 months.
Yeah, they're great people there. We've used them quite a bit.
Yeah.
Well, cool. Again, hey, I just want to thank you for taking the time, Paul, to talk about this car. Also, anybody on Bring a Trailer, check out Paul's 230 SL he has for sale right now. I was looking at the photos of it. The car's stunning, really cool. Check it out. But again, thank you, Paul, so much for taking the time. The Mike, the owner of the car now that we're representing, truly's love the car, and I love having the car here, and it's been a pleasure. So again, thank you very much.
It's been my pleasure, and thanks for taking the time out. Fun story.
Awesome. Thanks, Paul. Cheers.